going to go down through probably verse number 11 and just look at some things. You can read. We'll read along, and I'll say a few things, and then we'll have our business meeting. But chapter 5, verse 1, "For we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of God, an house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our house which is from heaven. If so be that, being clothed, we shall not be found naked. For we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened, not for that we would be unclothed, but clothed upon that mortality might be swallowed up in life. Now he that hath wrought us for the selfsame thing is God, who also hath given unto us the earnest of the Spirit. Therefore we are always confident, knowing that while we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. We are confident, I say, and willing rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. Wherefore we labor that whether present or absent, we may be accepted of Him. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that every one may receive the things done in his body according to that he hath done, whether it be good or bad. Knowing therefore the terror of the Lord, we persuade men, but we are made manifest unto God. And I trust also are made manifest in your consciences. Now, it's starting to look, he's looking at a transformation that takes place in a child of God. We think about our home. We think about our earthly home, and then you think about your spiritual home. The Spirit of the Lord that is indwelling us today is telling us through the Holy Ghost what we should, not what we can, but what we should and should not do as a child of God. So there's a change that takes place. We have an earthly home or an earthly tabernacle, and I'm going to look at it as our flesh tonight. Okay, I'm going to take it and I'm going to say this is our earthly flesh, and our earthly flesh has a completely different desire than our inner man, the spiritual flesh, or the spiritual being that we have, that we go through life with. The spiritual man is always pulling us toward positive things, even though the earthly man looks at those things and we say, I don't know that is the best thing for me. There's a lot of things that I've done in my life where I didn't seek Him to do it. I done it because I felt like it was the best thing, and it didn't take me long down the road to see that was not the best thing. We go on here and it says, for we groan earnestly, desiring to be clothed upon our house which is from heaven. I think about being clothed in righteousness when I look at this. I want to be clothed in something that when someone looks at me, I don't want them to say that's a Bible thumper. I want them to say that's Christian. That's a child of God. Now, if they want to call me a Bible thumper, that's one thing. But being a Bible thumper, and I'm going to use my little air quotes right here, doesn't necessarily make you a Christian. Do you understand what I mean by that? But you know what? That Spirit of Christ that comes into us, that's telling us, it changes your attitude and your mood. Okay? When you got saved, there should have been a change that took place in you that folks could see from the outside. Now, I know that change takes place on the inside, but whatever's on the inside will eventually work its way out to the outside. Won't anybody ever had a splinter in your hand that you couldn't get out? It went inside, but before long that thing festered up, and just one day you just rubbed across it and it popped out, didn't it? Well, it didn't belong in there. So the things of this world in a believer, in the child of God, does not belong in here. All right, there's no place for it. It's like oil and water is a really good way to talk about our spiritual man and our earthly man that we deal with. But he goes on right here, and we're talking about and looking at immortalities. What we're looking ahead to heaven. Now, I am glad to say that when I am done here, I won't have to worry anymore about the flesh anymore. There'll not be something pulling me from one side to the other. What it's going to be is I'm going to have that mind, and I'm going to have that body, and I'm going to be just like what He intends for me to be here. But the problem we all have, every one of us, is this fleshly robe that we wear. And what comes along with that flesh is what? The lust of the eyes, the pride of life, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, the pride of life. The same thing that brought man down, caused the fall, is the same thing that we deal with day in and day out. Our pride a lot of times will keep us from doing what God would have us to do. And you know what? There's a lot of times that I have to say it happens to me too. Because it does. I'm made out of the same stuff that you are. We're all made out of the same thing. We all came into this world the same way. We'll all go out the same way unless we're raptured out, but we won't need this there anyway. So isn't that that's something positive to think about, isn't it? But let's look here in verse number 4. It says, For we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened, not for that we would be unclothed, but clothed upon that mortality might be swallowed up in this life. I wish that I could live as spiritually as my ability is. You know why my ability is? Because He indwells me. He gives us the ability to live that life because He lives in us. But the problem about it is we don't want to listen to that inner man as much as we listen to what's on the outside. Like I said, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, all those things that we deal with day in and day out. I mean, there's not many of us that see something and say, well, I'd like to have that. Well, that right there gets us in trouble, doesn't it? When we don't look, when we're looking in places that we shouldn't be looking, it gets us in trouble. So I think that the ability is in all of us to live as godly as He would have us to live here on earth. The challenge is, are we willing to listen to the Holy Spirit? You know, I think about this a lot, and I've noticed it, especially here lately with Ellie, as she's starting to get older. You know, we got the teeny bopper pew back here now. About halfway back in the church, we got the teeny boppers back there, and you know, and I've started noticing, and please don't get me wrong, and if your children don't do this, please don't feel bad at me because mine does. But I see a spirit of rebellion as she's getting a little older, a little more independent, a little more know-it-all, and I see that, and you know what? I was that way too. And you were that way too. Now, granted, I'm a whole lot easier on her than my dad was on me, because he beat that out of me. Real nice like, but he beat that out of me. And, you know, and I learned. Well, that's just showing the fleshly side. Do I think that my daughter doesn't love me when she does something like that? No. That never crosses my mind. But when I set a plan for her, or I ask something of her, and it doesn't get done, that don't mean she don't love me. It just means that she's stubborn, and that she has her own will, And she has decided she'll do what she had rather do and then face the consequences versus just listening to what was going to, just doing what needed to be done. Is that not how we are? God might put something on your heart. And maybe it was a testimony. Maybe it was to help somebody. Maybe it was a gospel tract that He gave you, or that He said, you know what, that person right there needs a tract. And you said, well, Lord, I'm so busy right now. I don't have time, but I'll come back and I'll catch them sometime. Well, what happens is the Lord knows everyone's heart, not just our heart. So He knows that person's heart at that time. So what does that tell us? That tells us that maybe that's the time to go do it. Because their heart might be, you don't know what that person's going through. We have no idea. So we want to do right. I'll never forget this little old fella that went to our home church down at Midway, and he is mean as a snake. I mean, just mean. He grew up very rough, and I remember we had a meeting, and he come to the altar, and my pastor motioned for me to come up there and pray with him. Well, I started praying with him and talking to him, and he said, I need to be saved. He said, I am so mean. He said, I'm mean. And I mean, we're talking about a 10, 12-year-old kid. He said, preacher, I wasn't even a preacher. He said, Phil, I'm mean. He said, God ain't going to forgive me. He said, I think mean things. You know what that was? That was a kid being honest, because an adult wouldn't be honest like that. But he said, I'm mean. I do things that's not right. I talk mean to my grandma that keeps me. I talk mean to my papa. I do things that upsets them, and I don't want to upset them, but I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Well, that just shows us that that's in every one of us. It's in all of us. So when you think about that, you think about that ability's there, though, because he wasn't like that every day. He wasn't like that all the time. I mean, you don't. I mean, Ellie may be defiant, but she's not like that all the time. I mean, she's got a good hour a day that she's not. And that's when she's sleeping. Yeah. So, what do we do? Well, I've used this before, and I'm going to use it again because it fits so well. The one that's going to prevail in your life is the one that you're going to feed the most. Okay? Are we going to feed the spiritual, or are we going to feed the flesh? So it comes down to what we are putting in us is what's going to come out of us, and that's what it's going to be. And Brother Rick sends messages. Brother Joey sends messages. I mean, these men, they do a great job at helping one another. Hey, listen to this. This was good. This is good. Listen to this. It'll help you. And I'm thankful for that. Because what we're doing, you're feeding yourself that instead of feeding yourself things of the world. And the more that we feed ourselves the world, the more we act like the world, the more we look like the world. Have you ever seen a child that was very well behaved, but when they got around another child, they both didn't behave well? Yeah, we've all seen that. I've talked about that before. Well, it's kind of the same thing. What you're feeding, but if you put them around a child that's very well behaved, sometimes that child that might not be the best behaved comes down to that one. We see it. It happens. So he says here, you know, we want this tabernacle. We do groan and we are burdened. We want to do right because we can say, I'm going to heaven, but right now I'm mean as a junkyard dog. My flesh, it makes me want to do things that I know's not right. And I have to tell myself, why did you even look at that? Why did you even think that? Have you ever thought that? Why did I think that? Yeah. You get mad, somebody pulls out in front of you and you want to run over them. I mean, that's not Christ-like. But we do, don't we? Like, oh gosh, pull out in front of me like that. If I had a rubber bumper, I'd knock you to Jefferson. I mean, how many times have we thought things like that? But you know what? It's because we are not in that spiritual body yet. We don't have that body. But one day we will have. Can you imagine no warfare? Just think about that a minute. No warfare. There's no right or wrong. It's just everything is going to be right. That ought to excite us about heaven about as much, because now we're not worrying about we don't have to worry about this fleshly man because we've done dropped him. Now we get a glorified body and we all have the same mind and we're just like him. Isn't that, I mean, you think about it, you say, I heard people say, oh, if we're just like him, that'll be boring. No, I don't believe it'll be a bit boring. I believe we'll enjoy our time of not being pulled. You know, we're in a fix. We're in between two straits, I guess is a good way to put it. Which way are we going to go? And we deal with this day in and day out. And you know what? I believe with all my heart that's the reason that church attendance starts to fade. Is people get to the place to where they know what's right, but still it's so hard for them to get a hold of that and say, this is just what I'm going to be. It's hard. It is. It is hard. Let me move on here real quick. I'm trying to hurry. Verse 5 says, now he hath wrought us for the same self thing is God. So he that hath wrought us for the same self thing is God, who also hath given unto us the earnest of the Spirit. So we have that in us. He's given us that. When he saved us, he gave us that Spirit, that right Spirit. And I can't remember who I heard say this the other day, but it's kind of stuck with me. He said the devil is patient. Now think about that just a minute. The devil is patient. He's in no hurry. And because if he comes at us with something that just blows our mind, we're going to shut it down. But if he just barely eases something in, it's kind of like a root. You know, a little bitty root on a tree is not much bigger than a hair. And if it grows under your sidewalk, you really don't care, and you may not even know it's there. But you give that thing 20, 30 years, and as that thing gets bigger and bigger, and it cracks up the sidewall. It took it that long, even though it was there before. That root of bitterness, you know, that's kind of where that comes from. So when you're thinking about what he is doing in your life, the devil can't stand it, and he's standing back there saying, okay, I want to derail that. Now, you can help me here. What's the biggest thing that you can lose, in your opinion, after you're saved? We know we're not going to lose our soul, but what is the biggest thing you feel like you can lose while we're here on earth? Your testimony. That's exactly right. And you lose your testimony, and you know what? The devil's not going to come after you a week after you get saved for you to lose your testimony. No, he wants you to have time. He wants people to start to trust in you. He wants people to believe in you. He wants people to have confidence in you. And then all at once, you lose your testimony. And you might have worked 20 years on your testimony, and you lose it in a day. And here's the thing. You can work on it as long as you're on earth, and you'll never get back to where you were. It's hard. It's hard because people love to see, the world loves to see a Christian fall. Why is it when a preacher messes up, you hear about it so much? Well, we're held to a different standard, as we should be. But you know what? A Christian should be held to a different standard. But we all mess up. We all fail. But he's given us that Spirit, the earnest of that Spirit. Therefore, we are always confident, knowing that whilst we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. So as long as we have this flesh, we're not with Him. He's with us, but we're not with Him. we're battling, we deal with this flesh gets us in bind, it gets us in trouble, it hates God, it hates anything good. But therefore we are always confident, knowing that whilst we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. It says, for we walk by faith, not by sight. So we are walking by faith. You know, I could walk off of this, I could close my eyes or be blindfolded, and I could walk off of this platform, and I could put all my faith in you. And I could have you say, all right, preacher, there's a step. There's another step. Step to the left. I'm having to put my faith in you. And see, that's how we ought to be with God. We ought to put our blinders on and say, Father, by faith, I am stepping where you want me to step. I think me and Caleb had this conversation about a year ago about the same thing. Right before he surrendered his call to preach, as you know, it's all about him. It's not about what you can do. It's about what he can do through you. And you know what? He can use each and every one of us in a certain way that he wants to, if we will let him by faith. He don't send us a contract. We don't get a big thing in the mail. You don't get an email at 7 a.m. every morning that says, okay, this is how your day's going to go. You're going to do this, 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 and this. Thanks God. It doesn't happen that way. It would be a lot simpler if it would, but that's not walking by faith. Walking by faith is, I've said it a lot. I don't really believe in coinky dinks. I believe in God's grace. And when those things happen, sometimes they're so obvious, we want to say, oh, there ain't no way. And then if it's something that's not real obvious, but we kind of think, oh, ain't no way. Why? Because that's us. That's our flesh. We're walking by sight instead of faith. Verse 8, we are confident, I say, willing rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. Hey, that's where we want to be. That's our goal. As a child of God, we want to be with Him. That's our goal. That should be our desire. We're not worried about anything else. What is the reward of salvation? We're not going to hell. But on top of that, you've got to look at, I want to be with Him. I'm going to be in that place where there's no more torment, no more division, no more sickness, no more death, no more pain, no more getting old. I mean, we could go on and on and on, and those are just things that we think of in our fleshly bodies. There's going to be things there that we don't even think about because we're not even capable in this body to think of. I mean, it's beyond anything we could ever imagine. Wherefore, we labor that whether present or absent, we may be accepted of Him. We labor whether we're here or whether we're there, we want to be accepted of Him, don't we? What's that mean? We want Him to be well pleased with us. We want Him to be pleased. That ought to be the desire of every Christian's heart. Be pleased. We want Him to be pleased. You know what? I always wanted my parents to be pleased. I did. I wanted them to be proud of me. I didn't want to disappoint them. I wanted them to I didn't want to be a failure. I didn't want them to look at me and say, well, that was a waste of life. Sometimes I felt that way. Not because of them, but because of my flesh. Because of what I was. This is before I even got saved. And even after I got saved, those times it's like, good gracious. I can't even stand myself. We get that way because we're dealing with our flesh. And verse 10 says, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. We're going to be an open book before Him. So what does that tell us? We need to live the best we can here because that's what we're going to be judged on. Things we've done here. He's not going to look at you and say, well, you didn't do good enough. You're going to hell. He's not going to do that. But we ought to realize, and it is important, and sometimes I kind of just lose this in the, in the years and things like that. But I will give an account for every message that was ever preached from this pulpit, whether I preached it or someone else did, because He gave me charge over it. So it's a great responsibility. And you know what? When you stand before Him, I've said this before, there'll be no excuses. All we'll do is say, Lord, you're right. Lord, you're right. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive the things done in his body, according to that he hath done, whether it be good or bad. You know, isn't it something? We have a hard time sometimes remembering the good things when we want to be mad about something. I mean, I'm sure there ain't no wives here that's ever brought up something that happened a long time ago when you're in an argument. Or no husbands that's brought up something that happened a long time ago in an argument. You know, our memories are so short when it comes to the positive things, but we have a great big long memory when it comes to negative things. And that right there causes more issues. We say we're over it and we're past it. Well, how come it gets brought up every time there's a little disagreement? So, you know, I mean, and those things happen. You know what I'm talking about. But as being that child of God that He would have us to be, just because we're in our flesh, it's not an excuse to not be godly. It's not an excuse to not live right before it. It's not an excuse. Now, you say, okay, well, you're going to live perfect now? No. I'm going to try, but I'm not. You're going to try, but you're not. But that don't mean to try not to. You know, I wasn't ever a straight A student. And you know why I wasn't? Because I didn't try to be. I just wanted to get by. I think if I'd have tried, I could have been. Because I was up until 5th grade. And then that mean old teacher I had in the 5th grade, that's the reason my grades wasn't as good. She didn't teach me like the rest of them did. No, I didn't pay attention. I just got by. I don't want to just get by. Not with Him. I do want to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. I do want to hear that. And it's not because the pat on the back. I just want Him to be pleased with what I've done. That ought to be our desire tonight. All right. Well, you endured. Thank you for enduring.